All right, and welcome to episode 2 of Gongaga Radio.
All right.
I am Max.
And I'm Kevin.
And in this episode, I believe we're just going to be talking a little bit about the setting of Final Fantasy VII. And I guess as all of our discussions do, it kind of bounces between the OG versus the remake, which, is totally understandable because, again, it's coming out in a couple months. So
True.
Everyone's on edge right now as far as what will be in that game. But, definitely feel as though it's important to talk about the original setting because, it's so iconic, right?
Yeah, I think people talk about Midgar a lot, and, especially with Remake having just happened, when you look back at things like, Crisis Core and Advent Children and stuff like that, like Midgar just is the beating heart of this world. But it's, for as important as that one part of the setting is, the setting in general just doesn't really get a lot of attention, I feel, in a lot of discussions around 7.
Yeah, I would 100% agree with that. Mm-hmm. And it's something you and I have talked about before, whereas the story of 7 is not settings based, right? It's more of a narrative. It's about the story rather than it is about the setting. Yeah. Because like we've talked about, there's only how many locations? There's a handful of locations that you can actually visit in 7.
Yeah.
So I think it's interesting, and it is kind of assumed that there are these other towns, these other locations that you just never get to visit just because they aren't as important as places like Cosmo Canyon or Nibelheim, right?
Yeah, no. And, if we're going to assume that Gaia is a functioning world, then, Junon and Costa del Sol are not the only 2 ports.
Yeah, in the entire world. Yeah,
no.
Exactly.
So, they're, especially when we're talking about the original, came out in late 90s on the PS1. They had to work with what they had. And this was the first 3D Final Fantasy. Think about 6, which came right before it, great pixel art, but pixel nonetheless. So,
yeah.
They were really in new territory here. So, the setting not being a major part of the narrative, not being super critical. The planet as a whole is. But, it's not a story about political intrigue or warring nations or...
Yeah, exactly. You think about it, and it's this one nation that is controlled by Shinra. It really is.
That's the interesting thing, though, because it's not even necessarily like Shinra the nation. You don't meet people who identify as
Shinrian.
Yeah. The first time I don't know if the word Wu-Tai-in is ever actually uttered in the original. That's only in Yuffie's DLC for...
intermission.
Yeah, for intermission. That is a national identity, but, you're not even a Shinra citizen. You're a Shinra employee.
Yeah, right? Yeah, the middle manager they meet. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
He's identified as employee.
Midgar is basically all people who work for Shinra, either directly or tangentially. But they're kind of like the de facto government of the world. Calm is technically not Shinra, but any settlement that has a reactor is kind of at the mercy of Shinra.
Yeah, they're like you said, they're at the mercy of Shinra, and it makes sense because, as we just found out, the war on Wu-Tai, it started just because Wu-Tai was like, we don't want a reactor in Wu-Tai, and Midgar just didn't accept it.
Recently learned this while doing prep for this episode. I don't know why I always thought that Wu-Tai was just an enemy nation that was just you're gotten too big for your britches, Shinra. Nah, they were just a normal town, city, nation state, and then Shinra wasn't asking people if they wanted reactors. They were just dropping them at places, and when they went to go put one in Wu-Tai was like, no, and they were like, war it is then.
Yeah, and that just shows, the level of propaganda that Shinra, the company, will put out, right, as far as just that is, as far as what we found, that's the only reason the war started was just because the Wu-Tai just didn't want a reactor. Yeah. And now the narrative in Midgar is just these are the enemies. They are trying to destroy our way of life. And that's crazy. It's wild to think that the entire world is really I mean, it's at Shinra's whim, for lack of a better term. And you think about why aren't people kind of more attuned to the fact that this massive company is controlling the world? And the only real kind of obvious answer is convenience, right? The ability to turn your lights on, the ability to have heat and everything like that.
Yeah, Mako having only been around for like roughly 40 years as an available energy source. Like, if you consider that, where we are when we pick up with Cloud in 7, like that's 39 years after the first reactor went live. Like, the Industrial Revolution happened really fast in Gaia. Like, we went from presumably being at the whims of the monsters and living in these disparate towns without any sort of meaningful technology. Because Shinra, they built the first trains.
Yep.
Like planes and, cars, obviously. They're just like universally the source of technology in this setting, seemingly.
Yeah. I mean, look at Rocketown even. Like they had a space project, right? They're going to launch themselves to new planets in this 40-year span of discovering energy.
Yeah. So something that I think Rebirth is going to be like a whole lot more forthcoming with, or at least I hope it will be, is like how spread out is this technology? Because like Midgar is repeatedly stated to be the most like technologically advanced,
the technological hub of the world. Yeah.
No, like there's that one part where you're in Hojo's lab in Remake where he's like, Midgar is the most technologically advanced city on the planet, and this is the most technologically advanced room in all of Midgar.
Really? I didn't catch that.
Yeah, that's in like the hub. It's in the drum where they keep Genova and like all of the test subjects, tubes and stuff.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
So, like what you spend the first part of the game just in Midgard, just running from one place to another, jumping off trains, running through sewers, like all this stuff.
Yeah.
And then you get booted out, and then you're in this high fantasy world. So you move from this diesel punk like setting straight into a classic Final Fantasy thing, but you're still getting like the escape buggy. You're going to Gold Saucer, which is basically Vegas. You go to Rocket Town, and the Little Bronco and all that. But it's like you never have this coalescence of technology anywhere outside of Shinra headquarters. So it's weird that they're like in charge and everyone has these reactors against their will. And now you have electricity and all this good stuff. But it kind of seems like life outside of Midgar also sucks. But due to lack of resources and technology.
Yeah, and I think about the scene on the well with Tifa and Cloud as children, right? It's just like Cloud is just like, hey, I'm going to Midgar to become a soldier. I'm going to be the greatest soldier that's ever existed. And Tifa, all the boys are going there. So it seems like there's definitely like all of the outside surrounding towns outside of Midgar. And probably even Junon, I would imagine, is probably a similar situation. Whereas like that is kind of where everyone is trying to coalesce and trying to, that's where people will get success. That's where people will discover fame. Even at the Gold Saucer, like with Jessie's backstory and Remake, it's just like she was an actress, right? So that's where, she would go to the Gold Saucer and that's where she would pursue her dream of being an actress. So there is this level of kind of, it's this strange level of industrialization. And then you got this dude running around with his sheet metal sword, his massive sheet metal buster sword. And it's just like, what? Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And I mean, there's actually, like, now that I think about it, like, there's this little throwaway where when you're in the Nibelheim flashback and you can go root around in Tifa's house, you can find that letter that some other boy wrote to Tifa.
Yep.
And it's like, Tifa, I'm in Midgard. Can you believe it? This place is crazy. Like, it's so much more wild than everything we thought about. So it's like, it's these people that, like, probably, like, maybe saw Cars when Shinra would roll their troops through or something like that. But otherwise, like, they're living in, like, a frontier town. Like, Nibelheim seems to be, like, a cowboy Old West style, like...
Yeah, but then I would think to the ending of Remake, right? When you get out of Midgar and it's like... Chocobo Billy, or Chocobo Bill, you're driving in the truck with him.
Yeah.
So it doesn't seem like cars are necessarily a foreign concept to anyone outside these towns. It just seems like it's more localized. Everyone has a car in Midgar, so that it seems more of like this grandiose thing, I would imagine.
Yeah.
And like we've said, there's definitely parallels to the real world as well.
post-war Japan, where like Tokyo got rebuilt and built up hard, and they committed to modernization and some degrees a lot of westernization, and like basically this big urban building project bulldozed all the hills around old Edo, and you just saw all these old like countryside towns, like these more pastoral places, suddenly see all of their young people go out and look for jobs in Tokyo, and these towns started to die because they just wouldn't have populations to support them.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
No, cool stuff. The more you learn from watching lots of Miyazaki movies.
Yeah.
But no, and that's clearly what they're referencing here, at least when we look at things like Nibelheim and Gongaga, and like Coral being like an old mining town that basically Mako invalidated, but also Shinra very directly burned to the ground.
Yeah, exactly, right. It was strictly through their influence. Yeah.
But it's like when you think about places where there are like concentrations of wealth in Gaia, it's like Midgar.
Yeah.
Not Nibelheim. It's not Junon, where they just Shinra built a city on top of an existing city, so maybe up there. It ain't Wutai, that's for sure.
Yeah, that's very true. That's very true.
Like Midgar or Shinra being the de facto government, just because they have a monopoly over the resource that like defines this world, and then Midgar being just like the center of the world, basically.
Yeah.
But the part of that I think is most interesting to talk about is like how much of that is intentional storytelling and world building, and how much of that do you think is just a consequence of like world building not being a priority? Like they needed towns, things fell as they were, and this is the picture it paints.
Yeah, no, that's a great question, because like we said at the beginning, it's the Final Fantasy VII is not about the setting.
Yeah.
Gaia, I'm not even 100% sure that the word Gaia is mentioned more than like a handful of times in the game. Mm-hmm. So it's very kind of clear that the game is about the story that it's telling. Mm-hmm. And I think this is where people kind of get lost in their expectations of the remake. Mm-hmm. Is they were expecting Midgar to be this fully fleshed out town. I should be able to go to sections 1 through 8, right? Yeah. But no, that doesn't line up with how the original went. If you had the ability to go to every sector, above and below the plate, that would be a massive game. that would be I don't even know. That wouldn't be Final Fantasy VII.
No.
It would be another game taking place in Gaia. And I think that's an important distinction to make, because like we've said, it's not about the setting, it's about the story. And so the setting really does seem like you've got these towns, like you said, Midgar was kind of loosely based off of New York. Wutai is this kind of this foreign country on the other side of the world that like they want to keep their independence and their culture, and they refuse to accept this Shinrian way of life. Yeah. And so, that just Midgar then paints this ugly picture of Wutai because of this. And then you've got these Cosmo Canyon, which was loosely based off of the Grand Canyon. And so it's just like, this Native American influence. It seems like all of these locations hit this overarching kind of narrative point, right? Yeah. Whereas none of them are kind of meant to be a flushed out countryside.
Yeah. And I think that works to the game's advantage. Like the game doesn't like sit us down and roll out a map on the table and be like, this is what this country does, and like blah 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 blah. 16 does that. It's not true. It's not great. But and I think that the fact that it wasn't a priority, but it still paints this really compelling picture of a world dominated, let's put it frankly, by capitalism and like this greed in the face of pollution and resource like deprivation for other, I can't exactly say countries because there aren't countries.
Yeah,
right. But, like
there's 2 nations in the entire world.
Yeah, we follow this story of Cloud and Aerith and Sephiroth throughout that, and like we get these incidental pictures of these key locations. And in the original, when it's like an old PS1 game, it's left to us to assume that there probably is more to the world, and there's more going on. And like even just with Remake's approach to Midgar, like you get so much more like input on like the difference between the grounders and the platies. Like people from the plate who take the train down because there's such good food in the slums because it's like a lot more like
authentic or
for lack of a better word. Like, and like you go up there and people are like looking at the plate and it's just like, oh yeah, like this is just so much more comfortable, but it's all bathed in this turquoise glow all the time. No amount of blackout curtains will ever help you sleep.
The residual just hum of electricity
everything's
through the
just
town.
humming constantly. And, So I think it's cool because it lets the the viewer kind of paint their own picture, and these are the conclusions that we've come to just by looking at the other themes presented in the story. But Rebirth is going to be positioned to basically confirm or deny these theories that people have had for 20 years.
Yeah, and I mean, again, I wonder. Because obviously a big point of Remake is to try to flesh out the world. Is try to expand on things that we've already experienced. And I think that's, more, apparent in Remake just by expanding on the characters themselves. Specifically, I guess Jesse is what comes to mind.
Yeah.
And I would be interested, I'm very interested to see how they balance the setting and narrative, because again, I mean, the game was so based on narrative. Setting was very much, it felt like an afterthought, right? Yeah. It's like you got these locations, and the more you look at it, like these locations are kind of pinpoints for a bigger idea of that location. So it'll be interesting to see how they flesh that out. It really will be.
No, and I think they've done a really good job so far. Like just in Remake alone, like again, the way that they beefed up characters and the way that they beefed up like just Midgar and the slums, just all on their own. Wall Market, just like.
I mean, do you think it would be worth it for them to like expand on how the industrialization happened so quickly? Because like we said, I mean, 40 years ago was the first Mako reactor in Nibelheim. 40 years ago from the story. That's not a long time.
I think that
that's half of someone's lifespan.
I can think of very few properties that are less afraid of superfluous spin-offs than Final Fantasy VII. Like, but sure, you've got like Crisis Core and Dirge of Cerberus and Advent Children and all that stuff, but it's like the mobile games and the novels and like, they have plenty of other avenues to explore that. I don't necessarily think that, even though Rebirth is definitely like carrying the flag for the brand right now, I don't think they need to really dedicate more time than they have to. That being said, if they can like integrate that organically, I think it'd be badass. I think it could benefit from that, surely. I think it's a really compelling setting, but on the other hand, I also recognize that a lot of that is me just interpreting shadows cast on the wall. But
exactly, 100%. And that'll be kind of a big point, because like there's so many weird parts. Like Costa del Sol is something we always talk about. You're like Hojo painted as this evil genius, and he's just sitting there just bathing in the sun, just like women on either arm. It's just like, what are we doing? Like,
I really can't wait to see. Like, there's no way that they don't do that. It's such a famous scene, but like Hojo is,
I would be surprised.
They tripled the creep factor for Hojo. He sounds just slimy whenever he talks.
It's true.
It's rough.
Now imagine that on a beach.
I hope he's ripped. Underneath the lab coat, in the bathing suit.
Well, because in the OG, doesn't he turn into that giant like thing? I forget if he throws the monster at you or what.
No, you fight him like at the end.
Yeah, it's when once you parachute into Midgar. Yeah, that's when you fight. Is it Hojo that you fight?
Well, he comes back in Dirge of Cerberus. It's just regular old Hojo. So if that is him, then he just turns back.
It goes back to Hojo. Interesting. Yeah, that'll be strange.
I've never played Dirge of Cerberus, so
I don't think I haven't either. But it sounds like we're not missing out.
No, we'll see. We'll see. Maybe
judging from Maximilian Dude's playthroughs.
Oh man, judging by Clems's video. Is it on Steam or anything? Like, is it something that we could conceivably let's play?
Dirge of Cerberus?
Yeah.
That's a good question.
We
I'm
would have
sure
to
you
look
could
it
find it.
Yeah, we could find it, legally.
Yeah, exactly. I'm sure we can get it somehow.
Well, that is a hurdle for another day.
Yeah.
Although I think that makes for a convenient segue. Like, when we talk about the setting of 7, I'm approaching it naturally from a 7 OG and 7 remake standpoint. But it's like, we do have a lot of other, viewpoints on it at different points in the timeline. We have Crisis Core picking up when Zack is a recruit. And, way earlier on. And then we have all the way up through Advent Children, which is after Midgar is basically abandoned because the reactors start leaking Mako. So, a new city is built around it called Edge.
Edge, yeah.
Yeah, where no one lives in there anymore. And then, even in Dirge of Cerberus, the final battle takes place in the ruins of Midgar. And the ruins of Shinra.
Really?
Yeah.
Interesting.
We're fighting on top of ruined Shinra Tower.
Why did I think it was in Deep Ground?
Deep Ground is there, but that's beneath the city, and then the final fight takes you all the way up.
Because that's with Nero, right?
Yeah.
Or is it Weiss?
No, it's Weiss, and then it's whoever the big evil super summon is that they summon.
Interesting. Yeah, I don't know.
It might be one of the Bahamets or Diablos or something.
But it seems like the kind of each spin-off game, Crisis Core, Dirge of Cerberus, it seems like they do focus on one of these kind of distinct locations in the Final Fantasy world, whereas the OG just kind of hits on these distinct areas, right? It doesn't kind of delve too deep into any one of them beyond, I guess, Midgar a little more, but even then, it doesn't give too much of an explanation as to why they're so industrialized. It doesn't give too much explanation as to how they're so industrialized either.
Yeah.
So much of it seems like we discovered Mako energy, and then we created a reactor. Now we just have infinite power. It doesn't seem like there's too much, I guess, coherence in the way that they industrialized.
Well,
because they built a reactor in every single town. Why didn't Calm end up as the Midgar?
Well, that's one I actually do have an answer.
Nibelheim was the first reactor. Why is Nibelheim not the town?
Because clearly Shinra, I think, does not care about getting it right on the first try. Even with the fact that they're moving towards Neo Midgar once they find the Promised Land and stuff like that.
Okay.
They're totally happy to use unwitting people as test dummies. So, Nibelheim's reactor was probably a piece of shit. So, they did that, and then after they, got the hang of it, they built Midgar as a company town. And, that's where the headquarters was.
Gotcha.
And so many people moved there that they had to build the plates.
Yeah, that makes sense. Nibelheim was, the first test. Yeah.
Yeah. So, that makes sense. But, the other side to this is, I think it's just something that a lot of the medium struggles from. It's video games. You have to pick and choose what you're doing. Not everyone is looking for a history lesson.
Yeah.
I am a big fan of games where you get, codexes or, a little lore encyclopedias that'll tell you this type of stuff.
Yeah, agreed.
You don't look at Ocarina of Time and be like, why is there only Kakariko Village?
Yeah, right.
Where are all the other towns?
What is the history of Hyrule Fields?
How does this country have an economy of any kind?
Who invented the rupee?
Yeah, there are 20 NPCs in this game. This place will die out from inbreeding within a generation. So you have to understand at some point that it is what it is. But as 7 progresses and we get this rare second approach, with Remake and Rebirth going in and being able to pump up these details, it's interesting to consider. Okay, it was explainable away from a meta perspective in the original, but how are they going to maintain this level of quality and depth while approaching their frankly kind of underdeveloped world?
Yeah, and I mean, even my mind is going to Gil specifically. It's why is Gil even a currency when there is people struggling to eat in the towns outside of Midgar? It's this poverty is just everywhere outside of these big cities. Why is Gil even considered useful? Why isn't it Why isn't it livestock and stuff like that?
You know, it actually would have been really funny. Like, you know, Gil has just been what they use since Final Fantasy 1. So
Yeah,
it's
exactly, yeah.
But what would have been really funny is, like, if Gil is only the currency outside of Midgar, and in Midgar it's like Shinra bucks or something. Company store credit.
That would be pretty funny.
That would be pretty great. And thematic.
Yeah.
Because if you think about Midgar as, like, a company city, like, you know, they even say it when you go up and you look at the Sector 7 plate. And Jesse's like, yeah, this is where they put Shinra employees. Like, we have employee housing. Like, and this is one of the districts that's, like, mostly factories and, you know, employee houses. And the houses are pretty nice. It's cramped, but, you know, they're all right. But, like, most of the people who live in this city legitimately are either directly Shinra employees, either as, like, soldiers or techs or business people, like, you know, engineers, that type of thing. Or they're indirectly working for Shinra. Like, you know, they're helping, they're like cooks and, like, you know, construction people and stuff like that. So Shinra has created this place where they're, like, paying people money to work for them that is immediately going back into Shinra.
Their system, And I guess, like, kind of going on this, like, every location parallels somewhere in the real world. I mean, I guess that is... Right, that's kind of a warning towards capitalism, right?
Yeah.
Like, there's someone with a monopoly on the convenience of life, therefore they get to control how the world works.
Yeah, I mean, you know, we must. The thing about 7 is, like, more so even than, like, any other of the Final Fantasies that I can think of, is, like, it is very environmentally and anti-capitalistically inclined. Like, that's not, like, a crazy philosophy class take, I don't think.
Yeah.
Like, that's pretty on the nose if you've spent any time playing 7.
Yeah.
But, you know.
Yeah, and that definitely, I mean, that hits the point of, like, it's not about the location, it's about the story.
Yeah. But, you know, I can't, like, it would be... You can't really have a podcast about Final Fantasy VII without touching on environmentalism and, like, you know, the dangers of run-out-of-control capitalism.
Yeah.
But this is also a video game podcast, and we talk about that too much, everyone's going to get sad, because the real world is also a sad place.
Yeah, that's true.
But, you know, like...
I mean, it's clearly an influence on the game,
Yeah.
and it's clearly influence on the setting, because it seems like the developers almost... You know, this is their idea of what that looks like, right?
Yeah.
It's not so much like a warning as it is just kind of them being like, we could see this being how it is.
And I think that is one thing about the setting. And, like, if we're going to treat any part of this as, like, the core of the setting discussion, I think it's this. Like, one of the most compelling things about 7 to me is, like, yes, we can look at this as for, like, the real world parallels. And, like, it's really easy to look at it at face value and just be like, okay, yeah, this is why monopolies are super bad and why corporations can't be treated as government, because, you know, anything that's profit-based will always just undercut the people in the environment.
Yeah.
But also, when you look at 7 from the perspective of, like, why they chose this particular type of setting and why they chose these themes. I was explaining to you earlier, like, this image of Cloud, you know, coming right off the heels of 6, which was the most technologically advanced of the 7s. That was, like, true steampunk. Like, Cloud is this dude who's basically, like, in fatigues and a turtleneck, riding on a motorcycle up a highway with, like, his buddies that are wearing, like, you know, cargo pants and, like, you know, like, sportswear and stuff like that. And instead of going up, like, a castle or, like, an evil wizard's tower, they're going up a actual corporate skyscraper.
Yeah, an office building.
To fight not this evil warlock or the evil emperor, but the CEO at the top.
The president.
Yeah, the president. And, like, yeah, eventually we get to, you know, like, the Black Materia and Sephiroth and, like, aliens and magic and all that crazy shit. But, like, all of this is covered in this setting that is urban fantasy. Like, this is not, like, fantasy view of, like, technology powered by magic or anything. Like, yeah, that's Mako, but, like, it looks like it's just ripped out of the 80s. Like, there's telephone poles and, like, street lights.
Yeah.
Highways, like, shitty diners by the side of the road. People are driving, like, old Ford pickup trucks and stuff like that.
Yeah, and for what it's worth, I mean, that's roughly around the time where we were, like, 40 years into, like, industrialization, right? That was, if you're talking about, like, the 70s, 80s.
Yeah, the post-war boom after the 30s and 40s.
Exactly, yeah. That's, like, I mean, that's off the heels of, industrialization. So it totally makes sense that that's kind of the setting they chose and the setting they went with, because there is a lot of parallel to
it's very distinct, and I admire the fact that they didn't go with like flying cars,
yes,
or like hover stuff, or like the crystal powered stuff.
But it's just such a weird juxtaposition between the first enemy you fight has a gun, and the main character only uses a sword.
I love it.
A sword magic. It's so strange though.
It's strange, but it's so unique too. Like, you don't see a lot of people that like play a magic sword and sorcery in such a grounded, like, straight up modern real world technology setting.
Yeah.
Like, that, it's really like the only other game I can think of it that even does something like that is like Final Fantasy 15.
Really?
Yeah, or maybe like Shadowrun, kind of.
Shadowrun, interesting.
Yeah, right?
Yeah.
How's that for your urban fantasy deep cuts? But no, it's interesting because they chose that. It's such a distinct setting, even at a face value. But like, it also supports their themes so well, and like, it's also forces itself. It forces the player to be like, I have to relate to this. There is no mental barrier between me and this world of elves and dwarves and stuff. Like, this is just our world. I'm just in New York City. It's just weirdly turquoise. So, and like, people, no one bats an eye at giant sword guy because like that, it's just a thing. But like, it's like that 95% real kind of approach. It's so compelling.
It helps. Yeah, no, it helps with the buy-in for sure, right? Because I think that's one of the things they'd captivated audiences when it came out, because it had that level of visual relatability. Even though we're dealing with polygons here, is like everyone can recognize a picture of Times Square.
Sure.
I mean, same as anyone can recognize a picture of Midgar, who's played Final Fantasy VII. It's like, you get it. Like, this is the hub of industrialization. Mm-hmm. This is like the pinnacle of technology.
No, I can only imagine, because like, again, like I was like 6 in 1997.
Yeah.
Like, and again, if you haven't watched episode 1, go back and watch it. But I didn't have that build-up experience to 7. I didn't learn about 7 really until well after its legacy had established itself. But can you imagine being like a teenager back then and like having played Final Fantasy, 4, Final Fantasy 1 came out on the NES. Final Fantasy 2 was actually Final Fantasy 4 on the SNES.
Really?
And Final Fantasy 3 was actually Final Fantasy 6, which was also on the SNES.
Jesus Christ.
Yeah. The amount of games that the US got in the Final Fantasy series was murky until the 2000s.
Sure.
But like, imagine playing 1, which is like, 8-bit for real, like sword and sorcery based entirely off D&D.
Yeah.
Playing Final Fantasy 4, which is like the first really narrative one. Early Super NES, pretty good. That's Cecil and Kane and like all that stuff. Then playing 6, which is like considered one of the apex RPGs of all time, certainly on the Super NES. But like, even all of that is still like magic and summons and all this stuff.
Yeah, that high fantasy.
Yeah, this is, and like the RPG genre at this time is Chrono Trigger and Dragon Quest, all this other stuff. And then all of a sudden the promo materials for 7 are coming out, and you're like, all right, here we go again, another Final Fantasy. And you see this dude in military fatigues with a giant sword over his shoulder, looking up at a skyscraper with like spotlights on it, like. There are no trailers, like, they're not like dropping like stuff you could watch on YouTube back in the mid 90s. Like, you're looking at this and you're just, what am I looking at right now?
Yeah,
like, where are we going with this? And Tim Rogers on his legendary Let's Mosey video series, also go watch that, tells this hilarious anecdote of when he was at college down in Indiana, where, he had this roommate who was like a big NASCAR fan, like not at all bought into this stuff, saw a poster in the science lab of Cloud on the motorcycle with the Buster sword hanging off, and he was like, does that guy have a giant sword and a motorcycle? And Tim was like, yes. and he went out and bought a PS1 and 7 that very day. Like, it's just so distinct and like it's so against the grain.
Imagine his disappointment when he finds out you only ride the motorcycle once.
Yeah, but he beat the whole game.
Did he?
Yeah. His takeaway. I'm not going to stomp Tim Rogers' punchline, but that person is a reoccurring character.
Really?
In this story. So. But yes, no, like I can't even imagine what it would have been like growing up, having one idea of what a JRPG could be.
Yeah.
And swords and magic and elves and
airships. And I mean it's something that they've really done well with on every Final Fantasy. And I think it's one of the reasons people get confused if they're unfamiliar with Final Fantasy, just because they assume that it's all canonical with itself.
Sure.
But it's like, no, each Final Fantasy game is very... I mean, you could argue that the earlier ones were kind of they had similarities, but each one is very distinct in in what they're trying to kind of portray with the settings alone,
Agreed. No, and I mean, like, you have your certain mainstays, like airships always show up, chocobos, Moogles, all
Biggs
that
and
sort
Wedge.
of stuff. Yep. So, like, 7 did a good job of, like, keeping that anchored, and you're still here, and there's, like, that degree of whimsy that I think 7... maybe more so than any of the other ones that I can think of, like, has this balance of seriousness and then just, like, tongue-in-cheek, like, like, you have to get the dress and panties for
right. You find Tifa's orthopedic underwear. You're just like, what is going on?
Granny panties.
Yeah.
But, you have to cross-dress Cloud to find out that they're about to wipe out, like, 1/7 of the city.
Yeah.
And, like, or 1/8 of the city.
Yeah. I mean, that's just such good storytelling right there.
Yeah.
You really delve into Wall Market in order to find out, like, the bigger picture of the world. It's cool.
And, like, I think that's another part of the setting is, like, you have these really disparate locations. You've got Cosmo Canyon and Rocket Town and all that stuff, and you're chasing Sephiroth. But sometimes you're doing these weird mini games. Sometimes
you're doing squats.
You're doing squats. You're cross-dressing. You're breeding the perfect chocobo.
Yeah.
You're talking to Sid, who has like a terrible relationship with Shalinda or whatever her name was.
Oh yeah, his assistant.
And how his dreams died, and how Shinra just stole it from him, and how he's going to be a man of space.
Yep.
And then you watch Palmer get pasted by a truck.
Yeah, just get roasted
in basically the Final Fantasy VII original equivalent of a cutscene.
Yeah.
Like, they decided that was an important enough scene to render it.
After you go through the fight, after you roast him in a fight, he's running away. Just gets
I dream of seeing that redone.
Dude,
that's going to be amazing.
That's going to be that'd be a good scene.
I love it.
But I mean, I think it'll be a scene similar to. I don't think it'll be. It'll be more appropriately sprinkled into the story. I mean, like, it's not just going to be like fight Palmer and then he gets hit by a random truck.
I mean,
at least I hope so.
That would be.
Yeah, we'll see. We'll see.
But they did
speculations for other games.
They did it in like the
episode.
battle engine in the last one. It was like you hit that last hit, and then Palmer's like, "I'm out of here."
Yeah, exactly.
And he's like doing the runaway animation, and then a truck comes out of nowhere and.
If I remember correctly, he almost does like a Scooby Doo animation. Like he turns around, like whoop 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 whoop. Yeah.
Well, but can you imagine if they did it in remakes battle engine?
Oh my god!
Where you're like in there and you're locked on, and he's like, "I'm getting out of here." Then just from off screen.
Yeah, you're about to do a synergy attack, and all of a sudden, an 18-wheeler comes in.
I wish.
That'd be so good.
I can only hope.
Yeah, I mean, with the setting, I mean, it's just such a strange take on the whole steampunk / high fantasy world. But yeah, I mean, there's a lot of parallels, like we said, between it does seem very industrial high fantasy, right?
But like, I think if you. Again, it'd be really cool to get our hands on like some design doc stuff.
Oh my god, yeah! If we could ever actually talk to the developers, talk to Square Enix, be like, "Do you guys have any notes from '97?" That'd be nice.
Tune into podcast episode 102.
Yeah, right. When we have the devs on the podcast.
But if you like, I think it's probably a safe assumption that like if they had a thesis doc, like something that like a topic sentence for this game, it's like they are trying to show. Like the planet as a living organism, and like how greed and apathy towards that will just drain the life out of it, and how it's important for us to, realize that like while modern amenities are useful, like you can't disregard the environment around you.
Yeah.
And like, I don't think that would have landed as well without the type of juxtaposition they have from doing like this steampunk, diesel punk, like, you know, greasy, gritty New York City in the 80s. Like, so all technology is good, kind of.
So what you're saying is you don't think it would have landed as well if it was like castles, swords, and wizards?
No, yeah. I don't think it would have.
Just being like these magic crystals are stealing the energy of the earth. Something like that wouldn't have... I agree with that.
Well, I'll tell you what, and I'll spoil you. That is the plot of Final Fantasy 16.
Of 16, yeah.
Like, crystals are magic, and, like, you know, there are certain crystals, but the more you use them, the more the land dies, and the more the world dreams, because there's a finite amount of magic, and people are overdoing it. And it's like, the premise was thin to begin with, especially when you're casting magic in battle all the time.
Yeah.
And, like, I don't know. Is this too soon? Nah.
What?
Nah, this is a Final Fantasy podcast. Spoilers for the end of Final Fantasy 16.
Yeah.
Their solution to...
We're a 7 podcast.
But, you know, their solution at the end of 16 is that, you know, like, there's too many people... Like, certain people are born with the ability to use magic, so they're immediately enslaved to do things like cook and dry clothes. It's ridiculous. It is insane.
That's kind of funny.
I'll preface this by saying I have really mostly disdain for 16. I thought 16 kind of sucked.
I've heard nothing good about it, and I don't plan on playing it.
But, like, you know, like immediately magic users are enslaved, except for the best magic users who live as kings because they're summoners.
Interesting.
But at the end of it, it's just like, all right, the world is dying. Like, there's a visible blight on the land. The crystals are draining all the magic, and magic users accelerate the process.
Mm-hmm.
How do we resolve this while also getting rid of this horrible slave class that people are just born into misery and they live their lives as living batteries? The answer is to just not have any magic users anymore. It's just magic is taken away. So if you were thinking it was going to be find a way to live together in harmony and discard our prejudices, you were wrong.
Yeah, nope.
You have to remove the minority, says Final Fantasy 16.
Remove the virus, dude.
Yeah, that's not a good look. But also, it's like at the end, it's just like, dang, now we have to make a fire without magic.
Yeah. And I mean, honestly, this is kind of a good. I mean, it's a good kind of point towards Final Fantasy VII, specifically the ending of it. Is like, spoilers. I mean, once you defeat Sephiroth, he's like, there's no mention of like in the OG at least. There's no mention of what the world is afterwards. What happens when the cancer of the world was eradicated, right?
You don't even, like, it's left ambiguous in original whether your party even survives the fight.
Right, and so that's kind of like the I guess one of the draws of remake is to try to kind of put a bow on the end of that, right? Because the idea is, I guess, that Sephiroth didn't really die, and he was like put back into the life stream, and now this is kind of his next go at it. Yeah. Is that like the consensus?
It seems like he was co-opted by Genova. And, like, we still see Sephiroth in remake with, like, the cat slit pupils. Which, you know, it still appears to be Genova Sephiroth.
Yep.
So, like, again, we're retreading ground from the first one, but is the enemy Sephiroth or is the enemy Genova?
Yeah.
And, like, Genova being, like, a literal cancer on the planet that, like, the ancients, the people who were the most in touch with the planet, basically gave their lives to defeat the first
time. To take her out, yeah.
Yeah. So, you know, I think that'll be interesting. I do say that remake will have to tread carefully because, like, as much as, like, maybe you don't like the ambiguous ending and having a bow on it would be a little more satisfying. Mm-hmm. I'm sure there are tons of people out there who love it.
About that. That's just such an iconic scene, right? Is the end of you don't actually see yourself defeat Sephiroth. The last scene of the game is, like, Sephiroth in one, Cloud, you've got the action. You can only do one thing. That's attack. Yeah. And, you know, you're going to hit every time. So it's like, it's this weird kind of ambiguous ending that almost, wouldn't feel as good because the only way you could end it otherwise is being like, and then they defeated Sephiroth and everyone lived happily ever after, and you'll see a flower growing out of like a Midgar street.
The action, like the last thing you see, like after credits, the final 7 scene is Red 13 and his cubs running away. It's like 1,000 years later, and like you see Midgar like totally overgrown and stuff like that. So it's like at the very least, like Red must have survived, but it's like, are we gonna just get a scene of Cloud just like hucking it out of the damn crater.
Right?
Crawling physically out of the life stream.
Hop into the high wind and just be like,
Yeah.
well, let's go see Seventh Heaven. Let's go
Yeah,
on with
right.
that. Yeah.
I should start a bar. Well, this is like totally an aside, and like, you know, we don't necessarily have to leave this in, but do you think they're going to give us Omni Slash as an overdrive before that scene, or do you think they're going to hold it until the final showdown with Sephiroth?
Oh no, they'll give it to us. 100% they'll give it to us. I would argue that they would even change the final scene. You wouldn't be like, I don't even think you would play through it necessarily. I think it'll just be like you defeat Sephiroth and that'll be a cinematic, you know.
I could see it being like an Action Command cinematic, like pressing the buttons for each slash.
As it's going, press X, press square, try. Yeah, okay. That'd be
That's
interesting.
kind of cool. I like Action
Yeah,
Commands.
that'd be cool. That'd be cool. And then what if you press the wrong buttons and just Sephiroth wins?
I love games that do that.
Yeah. God of War specifically is what my mind goes to.
Spider-Man 2, the original on the PS2.
Really?
There's this really famous cutscene that I'll send you later, where it's like you have to like press X to like shoot your webs as you like jump off to save this woman.
Yeah.
If you don't press X, Spider-Man just like flattens on the ground, and this lady's like shaking her head, and a bomb goes off.
Are you kidding?
It's
All right, that's
great.
pretty hilarious.
Yeah. If you're gonna have Action Commands, you might as well.
No, that'll be interesting. But I mean, that's disc 3. That's
Yeah.
That's part 3. Reunion. I'm putting it now. I believe that will be the third name.
I would eat my hat if it's not.
Yeah, yeah. It has to be remake.
Rebirth.
Now that we have a lot more
Yeah.
context, Rebirth totally makes sense that he's trying to get everyone together for a reunion. You know, this just makes sense.
It's true. I'm actually like,
Even the Northern Crater is such a strange kind of. It's not even that imaginative, like, right? It's what the impact spot of
where Genova lands.
of Genova. It's the impact spot. So like it makes sense that story-wise, as Sephiroth explains it, it makes sense that that's where you go to heal the Earth. That's where all the life force will kind of gather to heal.
And it's also like the deepest spot, so like the closest you're going to get to the life stream.
To the heart of the Earth, yeah, to the life stream, exactly. But it's just such a... I mean, there's nothing really distinct beyond the fact that it's just like a crater where Genova kind of popped in.
You know, this is a setting question. And talking about the live stream just made me think about it. So bear with me. I'm going somewhere with this. So Aerith hangs out in a church, right? But we never really see a religion anywhere. Like, you know, she's just hanging out there. I always just took that to be like a, you know, like an interesting choice. Part of the eclectic pile of weird things that is, you know, Midgar.
Yeah.
But then, you know, there's graveyards too, and there's ghosts, and like, let's not even talk. We'll cover the train graveyard in different.
Yeah.
There's like an entirely paranormal incident that occurs that has nothing to do with Shinra or Mako at all. There's just
ghosts.
There's ghosts. Like they stumbled into a haunting that they had to like fucking exorcise before they continued the plot. It was wild, but like, you know, there are graveyards. Yeah, right. Like there's ghost kids, and there's just like the Grim Reaper. It's Eligor and his chariot.
Right. Yeah, I don't.
And they're like, you know, handprints on the walls. Like,
Yeah, very strange. Very strange.
I don't hate it, but
Yeah, I mean it's an aside.
you know, it's nice that there's more going on in the world than just, you know, Shinra and the great fight.
Yeah.
But I digress. Like, you know, there isn't so much a religion of the world, but like people will say so and so went back to the planet. You know, when you die, like you go back to the planet. And there are graveyards, and like maybe the church is for honoring the people who are gone. Like it makes sense, and like I think even in Cosmo Canyon, like it seems like these are people who are the most in touch. So it seems like it's generally understood that like, you know, planetism or whatever the hell Barrett called it at one point, planetology.
Planetology, yep.
Like if that's not a religion, it is something that people are vaguely aware of, and it seems like a common practice to assume that your dead ones have returned to the planet. And if your return to the planet means literally going back to the life stream,
Yeah.
and Mako is the life stream, like, shouldn't the general populace be at least vaguely aware of the fact that they're powering their lights with ghosts and their dead loved ones? Like,
Yeah, I mean,
if you go A to B and B to C, like
yeah, and I mean, what is materia? Condensed Mako, right?
Like
condensed ghosts.
Yeah,
like,
it's just like it's the magic power of dead people. It's souls. It is a river of souls. It's the river Styx.
Yeah, literally, materia's condensed soul energy.
Yeah, and like Aerith basically becomes the avatar when she descends into it. She is like the voice and the hands of the planet. She casts holy, and then cures geostigma later in that movie that I don't want to believe is canon. But
that's a good point.
The conception of what Mako is for the average person, like materia predates Shinra. Like people were finding that anyway. Like when we're in Mount Nebel, like you go down when you fall through the whatchamacallit. You find the natural spring the materia comes out of, and Sephiroth is like, oh, it's a natural miracle. Like this is condensed planet energy. So materia is actually naturally occurring. Like Shinra is clearly synthesizing it. But you can find that stuff anywhere, and like if you get lucky and it's a red material, it's just like some battle god lives, some inherent aspect of the human psyche or the planet is just like encased in this shit that just bubbles up out of springs.
Yeah.
So like
a geyser out of the heart of the world. Yeah.
So it's like a well documented. Like people know what Mako and the live stream are right here.
Well, I wonder how much the common person knows, right? Because going back to like the Wutai versus Shinra thing, like there's obviously a lot of propaganda that Shinra throws out into Midgar. So it's like Avalanche is painted as this horrible terrorist group. Yeah. But like realistically, Avalanche seems like the most in touch with Gaia, right?
They are kind of still a terrorist group.
Yeah, I mean, don't get me. They're an ends justify the means organization, 100%. But they seem like they are the only ones with this knowledge, whereas everyone else in Midgar is like, do they necessarily know what Mako energy is, or it's kind of like our interpretation of electricity. Like, if you ask the average person, do they understand electricity? I don't think so.
If I could handle any more horrible fake news conspiracy shit in my life, I would start telling people that electricity is ghosts. It's dead people. It's definitely souls, guys. Guys. How do magnets work? It's fucking ghosts.
I'd ask your dead grandparents. Man. It sounds like
Sorry, did you really need to leave that light on overnight? Think about it. But I agree. I think
that's so funny. That's such a good interpretation.
I mean, it's really explicit. So I agree with what you're saying. I think it is a combination of propaganda efforts through Shinra that is just like, no, Mako is infinite. It's different.
Mako's just this ever abundant thing.
Yeah, just because it's the same color and has all the same properties as the stuff that comes out of the sacred springs.
But even then, how did there seems like a very large disconnect with Neo Midgar and the Promised Land. Like how, if you have this understanding of the life force of the earth and how Mako is creating materia, then how is it even a thought that the Promised Land is a real place where we can walk to and build a city? How is that even a thought in the mind of Rufus? That doesn't make any fucking sense.
So here's the thing. I think that when you look at the board at Shinra, right? There's President Shinra, there's Hojo, and then there's Heidegger and
Scarlet.
Reeve and Scarlet.
Yep.
I think Heidegger, Scarlet, and Palmer are in it for the money. They're just amoral people that are
money and power, yeah.
Yeah, they're just here to be the top of the top, make all the money, be in charge. Mm-hmm. Reeve obviously is a little more humanitarian. Yep. That's going to be a podcast of its own. I don't know how that poor guy fucking fell into this job.
Right, dude?
It's got to be nepotism. It must have been his dad.
And how is he operating a robot for the good guys while working?
I don't even, whatever. Yeah. We're not going to talk about Kate Sith today. But I think Hojo is just a genuine mad scientist. I think he wants to learn about the ancients. I think he wants to breed Aerith with fucking dogs.
Yeah. Right. He's just a weird guy looking
Hojo
to do
is just
evil
fucking
things.
Obsessed with just science and knowledge.
Yep.
But I think President Shinra is an actual zealot. I think he's either crazy, like actually crazy, or I think that there is some sort of cultish, almost religious devotion on his thing with this design.
Are you referring to President Shinra or Rufus?
President Shinra.
Okay.
Because Rufus, Rufus apparently is getting a lot more play in Rebirth, or so I read.
Yeah.
Yeah, that'll be interesting. But like the first thing you hear from Rufus when you fight him on the roof in original is like, my dad thought that he could just rule the people around here by just keeping them complacent and just lying and spending money. Mm-hmm. But that's bad for business, and I'm going to be in charge through fear.
Yep.
So like Rufus to me seems more money-minded and probably less obsessive than his dad.
Okay.
But then again, he still has the Turks on your tail all the way throughout and up to, the Temple of the Ancients and all that. So, but I assume that for him, it's just more Mako, more money.
Yeah.
I think President Shinra is like a true believer in a really warped kind of way.
Okay, so you believe President Shinra truly believes that this promised land exists and is physical?
Yes, I do.
Interesting. And what do you think Rufus has that same belief?
I think Rufus doesn't even exist in the plot until his dad is dead. And then
that's true.
He just swoops in. I think,
I'm the president now.
I don't know how explicit this is because it's been a minute since I paid attention to the Rufus parts of the game, but I get this as that Rufus doesn't give a fuck about his dad.
Yeah, agreed.
I think Rufus just wants the company.
Agreed. Yeah, he just wants. Yeah, he's kind of in the same boat as Scarlet. He wants the money and power.
Yeah. So whether or not he actually wants to go build Neo Midgar on the Promised Land. Yeah. Either because he wants to live in glory amongst the Cetra on the Promised Land, or because he wants the sweet, sweet Mako money. Mm-hmm. I don't see him as the only way to explain President Shinra's actions is if he really thinks that all of this sacrifice is worth it just to get to the Promised Land.
Yeah. Yeah, and I guess the only kind of point against that I can think of really is when Aerith saves Marlene, right? She trades herself to Rufus for Marlene's safety, and
she trades herself to Seng, not Rufus.
Oh, that's right. Yeah. It's to Seng. It's not Rufus. Okay, which is part of the Turks. So yeah. That makes sense. Yeah.
Okay. Seng seems to be a good guy. He's just a company man. Yeah. So he has his own shit going on. The Turks will be an interesting episode.
I'm really excited to see how they flesh out the Turks. Yeah. And I mean, as much as we don't want to kind of delve into the novels and texts of every kind of subsidiary story out on the outskirts of it, I mean, eventually we'll have to, right? Yeah. I'll have to read some of the books, the novels on the Turks will be interesting to read, I think.
Yeah. Because the Turks have gotten a lot of supplementary materials that just totally goes. They had their own game. They had.
I remember you telling me about that last time.
Before Crisis.
Yep.
Yeah. That was the flip phone Nokia game.
Yeah, I wonder if we'd be able to find a version of that.
Oh my god.
Yeah. Yeah. Let us know if you guys want to see any Let's Plays of any of these older games, because I don't necessarily know that
we will be the only Before Crisis Let's Play on the internet.
On the internet, if we can find them.
I have an idea. I'll check it out later. I think I might have an idea where I could find that.
Gotcha. Yeah. No, we'll talk about it. We'll talk about it. But I mean, do you have anything else as far as the setting is concerned? Because I mean, as we've said, it's super unique. It's really, I don't think it's ever been done before and since. No one really has this kind of interplay between industry and high fantasy.
Not in a way that does it. I mean, I think 7 original definitely soars because at the time, it was a transition in hardware. Video games were starting to look differently, so it was minimalistic in a lot of ways, at least compared to the types of games we have now. Yeah. So it's the types of games that I can think of where you really run into those types of themes with fantasy elements. Deus Ex, maybe.
Oh, yeah.
But even that just doesn't quite have that same dichotomy of you're walking out of this diesel punk constantly night smoggy grimy Midgar into an open field and mountains and flowers and the sea and all that stuff.
Yeah.
That sudden juxtaposition between your themes displayed so clearly in your actual...
And even so clearly and so distinctively with each of the locales, like we were saying, there's only a handful of locales that you can actually see, but it's kind of, you're under the assumption that there's a lot more cities and towns.
Yeah. You know what I'll say? This will be my closing thought, just because I think it marries a lot of what we were talking about here. I think something that is subtly shown throughout all of the places that are not Midgar, consider the fact that they dropped the 7 plate and President Shinra is like, I don't give a fuck. We're just going to make a new Midgar anyway, and none of these greasy, shitty people are coming with us.
Yeah.
He doesn't give a fuck about Midgar.
These grease monkeys down below.
And then you look at... You look at all the other towns, you look at Rocket Town with the mossed over rocket tilting over there.
Yep.
Gongaga with the blown out
the reactor. Yep.
Coral that burnt to the ground. Junon that's just an undercity with a Shinra brass plate on top of it.
And a cannon. A Mako cannon.
And even the friggin' slum prison desert shit underneath the goddamn
Coral
gold
prison,
saucer.
dude. Yeah, the Coral prison.
Yeah, everything sucks everywhere else.
Yep.
And everyone's looking to Shinra to come back and wait for them to restore the reactors. Nibelheim, burnt to the ground. It's just a
waiting for Shinra to do the rocket, the space program again.
Yeah, everyone's waiting on Shinra, and Shinra has no intention of helping any other settlement in the world.
No.
They dropped reactors on everything. They put Wutai in the ground. They poisoned the earth. They took everything. And they've set themselves up, like we said at the beginning, as this de facto government. President Shinra is basically the king of the world. He runs everything. And he doesn't care about anything else other than Neo Midgar, a city that isn't even built yet. So we are looking at a world and a civilization that is literally on the verge of collapse. There's no help coming for any of these people. You've spent 40 years worshiping at the altar of technology and modernization and industrialization, and it's not going to pay off for you. You've put all of your eggs in one basket. One company provides all of your military and all of your resources. It's what makes all the cars and what makes all the guns.
Provides all your convenience, all your ease of life.
Nobody is self-sufficient anymore, and if we look at Wutai as an example, Shinra made it that way. Everyone became a vassal state to the Shinra Corporation, and they are just gonna fucking bail. If not to the promised land, then to literal space. That's the setting of 7 is inherently dire. And the entire patchwork of these individual places we see paints that picture.
Yeah, no, I think that's a phenomenal closing statement. I think that's phenomenal. And I think Avalanche is kind of the individuals who recognize it, right?
Yeah.
That's the reason Avalanche exists is because they're...
Throw off your Shinra masters.
Yeah.
Stop being addicted to Mako. Stand up. Say no.
I like it. Well, yeah, that will, I guess, conclude episode 2 here. Just giving us a little rundown of the setting. But, go ahead and...
we'll wrap it here. Tune back in for next episode of Gongaga Radio.
Yeah, I'm Max.
And I'm Kevin.
Have a good one.